Alright, in that last video we got this little a start. We opened the scene on which our game will be rendered, which is something that's going to need to happen every single game we write. And probably don't want to type this every single time. So now we're to what the main thing this tutorial is going to be about. And once we figure out what instructions need fed to the computer, we're going to rewrite that into instructions to write this. Because, well, this is just a text file with a .py extension, so the computer knows what to do when we say to run this. So we can have the computer write a text file for us and just give it the .py extension. So every one of these lines, I'm going to copy over to instructions for instructions to write this. So in a new file here, I'll go ahead and call this game writer, and this is the one that we will be importing into things, gamewriter.py. So it'll be a module we could import. So we could either go through and do it all as functions or with objects, with classes. I think I'm going to do it with classes. In particular, I'm going to create two classes. The first one, gamewriter 2D, and I suspect at this point you can already predict what the other class is going to be called. So we'll have obviously the initialize method, and I'm just going to build this up as I need it. So every time we come across something we need, kind of build up what needs to be there. Now, there's different ways to put together the lines to write. What I like to do is set up some arrays or lists or something. We're in Python, so just some basic lists for each section. So like here, looks like we have an import section where we'll have a bunch of lines on things to import. Then we'll have an initialize section. Then got a main loop section and a shutdown section. So that's what we have so far. So I'm going to set up a list for each one. So self.imports is going to be some list. Self.initialize is going to be some list. Self.mainLoop is going to be a list. And self.shutdown is going to be a list. And we'll just fill this list up with these lines of code and then create a method that just loops through all of these lists in this order and prints that to a new file. Is the basic idea here. So what are we going to need? I'm just going to go line by line. Well, we know this is going to happen every time, so I'm just going to copy that over and on the imports, paste that in. And as we add more and more features, we'll just append things onto this list. Right? Like at some point later, we're probably going to most definitely going to want to import math. We don't have that yet, but that sort of idea. We'll just have our starting point and we'll just keep appending to this list. And once we have our list built up, we'll print them all out. Right now, that's the only thing in the imports list. What's next? So in initialize, well, I know that's going to be the very first thing in the initialize time list every time. So I'll go ahead and start with that for the 2D version. What's next? Oh, clock. I'm going to put that right after, think about the frames per second, immediately every time. Oh, which that's a data field we will need. So frames per second equals 60 for a default value, but when we create an instance of this object, we want to make sure we're able to change that. Self.frames per second equals the frames per second that are passed in. And I'm just going to continue doing this, go line by line, think about everything we need. So This line, we could probably just skip storing that somewhere and pass the tuple in directly. So we need a width and a height. I think I'll pass that in before frames per second. So width equals 768 and height equals 512. And just set up some data fields for them. Self.width, and since we're in Python, I'm just going to leave these accessible instead of doing the semi-static version of private. If you prefer, you can go ahead and set that up and make some getters and setters in your version. Whichever way you prefer, do what makes sense to you, and then it'll be really easy to remember. So once you have the instructions on how the instructions to write the file, you'll be able to do that over and over and over again, and you won't have to worry about digging through examples and API documentation to figure it out, because all the stuff will just be what you called it. When you want to know, what you would call the height of the scene you're looking at, you don't have to think about it because it's just whatever you would call that. Or you don't have to go look it up. It's just what you would call it. So I'm going to continue with this. Just go line for line, copying over what's here, setting up some data fields, and adding what I can to the list. And there's no need to watch me type every single line. So I'm going to pause the video and do some typing, and I'll be back when there's something else to talk about. Okay, so something else worth mentioning here, I suppose. As I was going down here, this is going to need done in a method because it'll need done after we initialize these things. Same thing here because we'll pass in the title of a game, which those are going to be data fields we'll need as well. A title data field, might as well add that. And I think I'll leave that as one without a default. So there has to be a title passed in, then width and height, frames per second. I'll try to keep them in the same order here to make it easier to troubleshoot this later. But the thing I was going to mention is, down here, that's going to start the main loop. Then that'll be the second thing. Then this line is going to be the first thing in the main loop every time, so it can go right in the initialization array. But we're in Python, so that for loop needs tabbed over. So I'm going to copy that, come over here, and the third thing here, in quote marks, will be that line, but I want to make sure and tab over to get that line. And same thing on the next line, you need to tab over twice for it. Yeah. And that's going to be the first one every time because that's the graceful shutdown. So we're going to print those words and then tab over twice for this one, /t/t. And same thing here, but we need to remember to include the escape sequence for the tab just to get that indenting in there. So I'll pause until I get to the next significant point to talk about. Okay, so I just continued on line by line through this one we put together, and everything there I just appended it onto these lists. If there was something specific that would need done after initialization, such as set the screen size, set display mode, the parentheses, and then we need to pass in a tuple. Oh, so I think we need another set of parentheses here. I almost missed that. Needs passed in as a tuple. Yeah, and so another parenthesis here. That way we have a tuple inside of our method, which also has parentheses. And just appended all the lines, did a bunch of casting, all of that stuff. So now for the meat and bones of this, a method called writeGame. And all we really need to do is call these methods to finish filling, to make sure our initialize section, call that, call self.main loop section, and on imports and shutdown I didn't have anything to add yet, so there'll be virtually identical methods when I get up to that. And after we call them, we just need to write this to a text file. So with open self.title plus the .py extension for write mode as to file. But we just need to loop through all of these and export it. So for line in self.imports, we're just going to do to-file.write, and we want to write the line, and we're in Python, so we want to remember to add a new line at the end of each one. So I'm going to go through here and just do the for loop through each one of our arrays of lines of code and write that to this .py file, and be back just in a second to see the result of it. Okay, so I finished that writing the file method, which is the main thing that this object needs to do for us. And now, so this is a module we can import and use elsewhere, and maybe eventually have a graphical user interface to it so that we can drag our mouse around and do these things. But for testing now, we can just create an instance of this, Game Writer 2D, and we do have to pass in the title. That was the only one I left required. There's a default width, height, and frames per second. So pass in a title. I'll just call this test game 1, and then call gw.writeGame method. So let's give this a run and see if that worked out. So we're in the right folder here, so call Python game writer.py. Oh, did get a typo. So it appears I changed my name about naming things. Down here I tried to add scene width and scene height, but I called them width and height. But as I think about it, I think scene width and scene height are better names. So I'm going to use those names. Paste that in, and then call this one scene height. Copy, paste, paste. Save that and give it another try. Oh, it says it wrote a file. So we come over here, open this up, and take a look at it. Looks like everything's there. So, there's some indenting, missing some indenting. So I'll go through and fix that real quick. So I was able to look at the results from that, compare it with this, and figure out this part got added to the wrong array here to begin with. It should have been in the main loop, and it was in the initialize loop. And the clock.tick should have been indented. So give that another try here. I got those fixed. Give that another try. Says it wrote it. So open this up with Notepad++. Oh, that looks better. This line's still in the wrong place. After that pass, it looks like it wrote the right thing. So I'm just going to run that and see what happens. Oh, there's our PyGame window. So that'll be good for this one. So instead of just writing those instructions, we wrote the instructions to write those instructions. So that's what this tutorial playlist is going to be doing mostly. That way it's very reusable. We can do it again and again and again. And once we write it once, we only have to write it once. Once we write it, we can use it over and over and over again. So see you in the next video.